Behavior alters mood much more than thinking. Cognitive behavior therapy is so much more than changing thoughts and beliefs. It's really about enabling the person to have an experience that automatically changes those beliefs in a way that's meaningful and very often lasting. Welcome to The Art of Therapy, Season 3, Episode 13.
It's good being back with you again today, just in our studio.
Yes, I feel the same way.
Yeah. And I think just to recap a bit on the last episode. So the last time we really started to explore the foundations of cognitive therapy, and we looked at Ellis and Beck, and just how they really have a revolutionary impact on the field of psychotherapy.
Yeah, just to think about their contributions and what that meant for therapy as you note, a revolution, and hence something of a cognitive revolution.
Indeed, yes. Now, I think if we just look at Ellis and how he started to challenge just the beliefs that it's events that causes us distress, but actually started to see that it's actually our beliefs about the events that causes distress for individuals.
Yes.
And that's a completely different frame again.
It is. And that thinking is so adroit the moment that it moves from the situation to our beliefs about that situation. And that makes all the difference.
It really does make all the difference, yes. And then, of course, we can't leave out Beck and just his contributions where he discovered the automatic thoughts that people have. And you said the previous time, is that he worked specifically around depression and how he identified the cognitive triads where people that do experience depression, where they actually experience a negative view about themselves and about others, the world, but also about their future as well.
Yeah, his contributions are so significant and over so many decades. It's difficult to even identify where his contributions begin and end, because they really are what is part of today CBT. And he continued developing and contributing. And I think, as we noted last episode, he passed fairly recently. So he had just developed, contributed. So where does cognitive therapy and CBT, cognitive behavior therapy, in relation to him, and it's difficult to know where it begins and ends. Just constant contributions.
It's just like you say, it was constant contributions, and he just expanded the field of psychotherapy. And
yes.
Like you say, cognitive therapy and CBTs, they really interlinked.
Very much.
So maybe if we can start to have more of a look at cognitive behavior therapy and exploring that more.
Okay. Perhaps we could kick off with, say, the core of it. Having reviewed cognitive theory and something of the revolution, what that meant was that Ellis and Beck had profoundly sort of uncovered the role of information systems at the level of the mind and ways of thinking. And then, having identified that, the question was, well, how do we bring about change? And here there's just a very, very significant contribution from Beck, who began to emphasize, and both of them, but what this began to evolve into is the role of behavior. So it's one thing to identify these thought processes, but how do we change them, and where does behavior come in? And so, of course, the natural evolution of this would be the integration of both the behavioral approach and cognitive therapy, bringing these together in the form of cognitive behavior therapy. Wow.
It is amazing. It's really bringing two worlds together that create, and then just adds to those lenses.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
So it really is those, it's the cognitive side and the behavior side that we bring together. Maybe if we can really start to have a look at just how is this? How does the cognitive behavior therapy work? And we know we've already started to explore just the contributions of Ellis and Beck. But if we can go into more detail around that.
Yeah. It's a really sophisticated therapeutic approach that's developed over decades, and it's extremely nuanced. So maybe we could just look at a few basic concepts, because this is really an introduction, and where we're headed is building and building an integrative approach. So let's just look almost arbitrarily at just a little bit, just punctuate here.
Okay.
So again, the core understanding here, it's so elegant, which is that it's not the situation that determines how a person feels, but it's their interpretation, the meaning they give to that situation that determines it. And this thinking is at the core of CBT. So if we just look at this, what happens? Well, there's a situation that occurs, then there's an interpretation of that generates emotion, that causes or leads to the behavior, that creates an outcome, but that outcome in and of itself reinforces the same with the original interpretation. And so there's this loop. And so in CBT, we are constantly examining this loop, because it's this particular loop that is understood and been demonstrated to maintain a great number of psychological difficulties and distress. And what's more, it can be altered.
And that's the beauty of it.
Yes.
So if you can understand the loop and the different aspects that's part of the loop, then we can go and have a look at each aspect. And that's what can be changed and can be altered.
Yes. I mean, we could take, for instance, panic attacks. If one just looks at what's going on in terms of this loop, someone's heart rate increases, and then their interpretation of that is, there's something wrong with me, as in there's something wrong with my heart, or something to that effect. Immediately, then there's fear. That leads to an increase in physiological arousal. And the next step is that someone will either try to withdraw or soothe themselves. But in that loop, what the brain has apparently learned is that the situation was dangerous. And I only managed because I escaped the situation. And so that's the loop, and it just strengthens.
And then, of course, if you escape the situation, there's that massive relief.
Yes.
But then the next time, the anxiety is even higher and feeling more threatened.
Yes, it's a vicious cycle. So there's initially that relief, but that in itself reinforces the belief or the automatic thinking. In this case, let's just work at a higher level. It reinforces that, and so the anxiety increases.
And if in the CBT, if we can understand all of these different aspects, the automatic thoughts and the behavior and the emotions, that they all get linked and then they feed into each other, and we can change one aspect of it, there can already be a change. And if there's change in one aspect, then there can be changes in other aspects.
Yes, very much. Because one is now intervening in that loop. And as soon as that loop is identified, but more importantly, and this is one of the golden keys of CBT, it's what is maintaining that loop.
Okay.
What is it? What's the behavior that's maintaining it? And very often, the core of that, with the pattern of that behavior, relates to avoidance.
If you avoid it, then it gets reinforced.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
It actually reminds me of a training that I did with you, where it really showed this pattern. And it seems so simple, but it's amazing. And if we can understand that the behavior maintains the anxiety, then when we can work on that, then
Yes.
it can bring massive relief.
Yes, it is. On the one hand, it's once you see it and recognize what is the behavior that maintains it, and very often avoidance, it seems so evident, but it is most profound because it truly affects us as human beings. That loop affects us so readily in our thoughts, behaviors, and that cycle. And so, yes, the CBT not only identifies it, but then considers, well, how do we work with this? And it always, for the most part, will look at it in terms of your 5 layers, the situation itself, the automatic thoughts that identified or occur, then looking at the emotions, the behaviors, and then the underlying beliefs. And wow, this is where CBT comes into its own, because in CBT you won't simply say, I felt bad. You would actually be able to identify the emotion. It's very empowering for the client. I felt anxious, and my anxiety was a 7 out of 10. 10 being the worst anxiety, the most fearful thing I've experienced, and 1 being not at all. But the client will identify the emotion and rate it. So it's quite something. And then you won't, for instance, just say that typically I felt negative about something. You would actually identify it. In this situation, I had the thought that other people would judge me and were judging my talking as incompetent. It may not be as sophisticated as that, but effectively the client actually learns to identify what that thought is that's occurring. And it's one thing when we have a thought, it has that automatic quality, but it's another thing when we begin to be able to articulate it. That's already meaningful in and of itself. So CBT really just becomes very, very precise.
And it's working with the client in helping to explore that and bring that up for them so that they can learn how to do it.
Exactly. Because that's such a key part of CBT. What it is really going for is teaching the client skills so that at a later point, when they are faced with difficulties and challenges, they can begin to identify some of their own situations that trigger their automatic thoughts and their emotions, their behaviors, and even begin to consider some of the beliefs. So it can be really empowering. Yeah. So I would say that part of it involves in CBT, really, people often think of it as some remarkable smart techniques, but no, it's well beyond anything like that. A core part of CBT involves that formulation and learning that. And once the client can get this across to the client, or the therapist can get this across, one immediately begins to identify what are the triggers, what's that automatic thought, what are the feelings, what's the behavior, and then beginning to look at what are these sort of consequences, what are the short-term, what's the short-term relief? You spoke about that relief earlier, but what are the long-term consequences?
Okay.
And as one begins to see it, you begin to see the pattern, and it can be extremely empowering and very freeing.
can actually, when clients can start to acknowledge it and see it, it gives them that power that there can be changes. Because if you understand the pattern, then of course the pattern can be changed.
Yes, exactly. And once you begin to examine automatic thoughts, for instance, as the therapist assists one in going further and understanding this further, you can begin to consider and understand what are some of the assumptions. We spoke about that last episode. Or what are some of the rules? And those would be considered the intermediate beliefs. I must be like this or that. This is how it is. These intermediate beliefs. But once you begin to see that, you can also be guided into understanding much more the core beliefs, much and even deeper, those schemas that remarkably always, very typically involve a statement of I and very often am. So I am helpless. What does that mean? Well, if that were true, what does that say about you? And you get all the way down with that downward arrow. I am vulnerable or helpless, or something, again, terrifying, I'm unlovable. It sounds so elementary, but these are profound ways of thinking that influence us, and beliefs. It's at the level of beliefs.
And we don't initially actually understand that cognitions it's always there. Cognitions are not neutral. It has a filter, and that everything is seen through this filter.
Yes. And we can often recognize in others, but it's sometimes more difficult to recognize this loop in ourselves.
But when we do, and when we have the skills with that, then we can do something about it.
Yes, because that's the core of it. Once we can understand what is this loop, what's the behavior that maintains it, and then what's the belief that's being protected. Wow.
We can work with that.
Yes, and it's changeable. We can alter that. We don't need to suffer with that. If we just get the right help, we know how.
And it doesn't have to be, it's not all in once. It's these small steps, these small behavioral changes that really gives a different experience.
Yes.
And that then alters our cognition and our automatic thoughts again.
Yes, I think what you note there is important. If we just explore just some of the techniques, there are so many techniques and the nuances, very, very, I would say comprehensive, very, very carefully thought through. But if we just were to take a few, I would say there are three very, very key ones. The first is behavioral activation.
Okay.
And the second is exposure. And the third one could identify as behavioral experimentation.
Okay.
But let's just take the first one, behavioral activation. What is just so, it's the clarity about this, is that behavior alters mood more than thinking.
Okay.
So behavior alters mood more than thinking, generally speaking.
As soon as we can understand that, it becomes powerful, because we can do a lot more. It's much easier to do something than it is to change our thoughts about something.
Exactly. And that's, again, one of the big discoveries in CBT, because take someone who's got low mood. They respond to that low mood often by withdrawing. But that same withdrawal prevents or limits opportunity for reward, so any pleasure, for engagement, for meaning. And so as they withdraw, that reinforces their interpretation. And when someone is in that process, you can't simply try to motivate them. And that's where often very social responses, well meant, trying to motivate someone. No. But what is possible is once one understands that behavior alters mood more than thinking, that's one of the key and exciting developments again in CBT that introduce behavioral activation, behavior that is scheduled and is very tangible, very doable, that relates to an action. And as long as that, whatever it is, it's not the size or the scope, it's more the experience of it. And as soon as any person experiences either self-mastery through that, or some kind of pleasure, that is an experience that is meaningful and can begin to mobilize and begin to alter that loop. It's just so small, but behavioral activation, a profound contribution, especially when it comes to issues of low mood, depression.
It actually, just the behavior activation, that's the part that changes the mood. And it changes the focus and it makes it more doable then.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. And that can be someone's initial success when they are really stuck in the cognitive triad that we spoke about. Some of those cognitions are inaccessible, or certainly difficult to access. But behavioral activation can be just really meaningful. But, we just said we'll look at some of the techniques, and there are many. But the other one that just I noted there was exposure. Wow. If I had to consider what is one of the most significant, one of the greatest contributions to psychotherapy and change, this would certainly be up there.
Okay.
Because exposure has to do with the understanding of what often maintains something, and it's avoidance. Avoidance exists because any kind of thing that is feared is addressed through that mechanism of avoidance. So when there's any kind of anxiety, anytime the reaction is one of avoidance, that maintains it.
So it's that exposure to it, and if it's avoidance, then we don't get exposed to it.
Exactly.
And that just makes the anxiety even more and more.
Exactly. Because as soon as there's any kind of avoidance, the person can't ever discover or learn that they can cope. And they don't ever learn that the feared situation may not occur.
Psychotherapy is not only a profession, it's a state of being. And for that, it requires continuous learning, training, and refining your skills. If you would like to become better in your role as a psychotherapist, come and join Dr. Warwick Phipps for in-person training at Treatment Work Centre, where you will experience training like never before from a thought leader and expert in psychotherapy. If you would like some more information on our training or to book a training session, please visit the link in the description. And also, if you find these podcast episodes meaningful, please subscribe to The Art of Therapy. It just makes me think if someone has a fear around speaking up in a meeting, for instance, if they avoid saying anything or contributing anything, they never have a different experience. And that maintains that feedback loop then.
Yes.
And it is, if someone can have that exposure then of once being able just to contribute something small and having an exposure to that already changes it.
Exactly. Because it's self-reinforcing. In that sense, then, the anxiety exists because the avoidance persists. It's that, and it's very, very strong. So one of the most profound contributions is at the level of exposure, because exposure involves the systematic exposure or approach to the feared situation. But each time therapy just levels up, that thinking was there with behavior therapy and reciprocal inhibition. But CBT takes it further, because what it identifies, it's not only the exposure to the feared situation, but the exposure without the safety behaviors.
Yes.
Because the safety behavior is the avoidance that maintains it. And so, yes, if someone is able to approaches that feared situation, but those safety behaviors are there, which are very subtle, as in excessive preparation, as in seeking reassurance, as in avoiding eye contact, maybe keeping something just in case. These safety behaviors are really subtle. But if someone goes through the experience and faces it, but with the safety behaviors, the brain interprets this is that it was a dangerous situation. And I survived it because I was protected, not because I am safe. And that's totally different.
It's completely different the way you actually describe it.
Yes.
And it feels those safety mechanisms, it feels so natural to do it. But we don't realize the impact of that.
Exactly. And so, yes, this in CBT, the therapist will not only facilitate that careful exposure and gradual and systematic, but carefully assist the client to begin removing those safety behaviors.
One step at a time.
One step at a time, yes.
Sure.
Yeah.
That really it's such a different perspective that just contributes to understanding human beings.
Yes, yes. And that loop is over and over again. Yeah. And I said just that we could explore three, for instance. The third one, and it's difficult to know which is more valuable because they're all so valuable, behavioral experimentation. It's so elegant in CBT, because what CBT shows us is that when it comes to thoughts, don't challenge them, test them.
Okay.
And the reason for that is that it is behavioral experience that changes our beliefs.
It's not challenging them, it's actually experiencing it.
Yes. If one challenges or tries to persuade, that's on a cognitive level. But any kind of change in experience will change beliefs. And so in CBT, if someone has a particular thought, an automatic thought, for instance, instead of arguing about it and trying to disprove it, no, just quite simply, in a safe way, help and work with the client to create a very simple behavioral experiment where they're going to carefully test this.
Sure.
So you mentioned someone who has a fear of speaking in public, and perhaps the automatic thought is they'll see that when I speak up, they'll see that I don't know what I'm saying. Or they will, when I speak up, they will think I don't know what I'm saying. Now, the moment you're getting closer to that, now you can start to test it.
Okay.
And so the behavioral experiment will be a very controlled way, situation of speaking up and then observing what actually happens and then reviewing that. And in the review, the client's empowered and will often do it with therapist or even at some point without. What did I predict was going to happen? What actually happened? And what does that mean? And that change, that experience, that behavioral experience will change the belief. So it's not simply about insight. In fact, insight is not necessarily a precursor for change, and it's not even needed. We'll get into that in as we explore other aspects of an integrative approach. But it's this understanding that we see with CBT, that it's the behavioral experimentation, the behavioral experience that changes the belief.
Oh, that is just it opens up the world of really understanding CBT, and that it is, you can't. It doesn't help to argue with these thoughts. It doesn't have to help to argue with it and to try to persuade someone, because it's all on a cognitive level.
Yes.
But it's when we experience something, when we have a different experience, and we can have a look at what we thought would happen and what actually happens.
Yes.
And that makes the difference.
Well, that's it, because it becomes very structured, and I do think, and systematic, one can see these patterns. And it's part of the beauty of CBT, where it really is, it's a very structured approach. And the session has a structure, because very often if there isn't structure, what CBT identifies that you can get drift, and it can move into insight. And again, insight is not a precursor or it's not a requirement for change. You can have insight, but it may not lead to change, because there needs to be a behavioral experience and a change in those beliefs. So it's very structured.
And that's what actually helps with it. And it also helps to track the changes then, and to track actually the progress of clients.
Yes.
Both for the therapist, but then of course for the client as well.
Yes. And that's why if one just looks at a basic, if we just touch on that, the basic session would be immediately setting an agenda. Wow, you've got an agenda in a therapeutic process. Shows the degree of structure and focus. So there's an agenda. Okay. And then reviewing the feedback from whatever was explored, or what situation the client was willing to look at or take on.
Okay.
And then starting to say, okay, well, what shall we, in terms of, once that agenda is there and you've reviewed, but how does one come in from a therapeutic intervention? Okay. Which one will do really adroitly, carefully, a very supportive way in CBT, and then starting to look at an agreement of what will be explored between sessions. What is that? And then an agreement for feedback. And it's a beautiful process, because it's very structured. The client always knows what to expect, and they are something of they participate in the therapy process.
They know what to expect, and they agree to it as well.
Yes.
And that in itself is already empowering.
It is very empowering. Yeah.
We've started to really have a look at understanding CBT, and there's a lot of information on it, and to really have a look at understanding how our thoughts, our behavior, our emotions, how all of them are linked. But also understanding what is the different techniques to CBT.
Yes.
And we touched on the three, and I think it just became so clear how you described it. And it's exciting to actually understand more of this, and to be able to create the process behind it. It makes it so clear then.
Yes. Once you understand CBT and understand this loop, and what one is busy with, and the client, it's extremely exciting. And it's considered very pragmatic. So much so today that even in terms of the way we now approach it and approach problems, very often we're going to work on the behavioral side. And that's really key. Of course, we still move for and explore cognition, but sometimes the emphasis on that is overused.
Okay.
Yeah, one needs to approach that mindfully, but even when one is doing that, and you get down, and you're able with downward arrow to go all the way down, if that were true, what would that say about you? that is the case, what would that mean? And you get all the way down to even, let's say, you get down to that core belief that has been central to this. Something is, well, I'm not worthy, or I cannot be loved, or even when you get down to that core belief, that schema, it still requires behavioral experience.
Yes.
So it's so tempting to go, we can both see it, so let's try to shift that. No, again, very often still through behavioral testing.
The behavior side, that's really the nodal point of this.
It is. And something that I would say is central now is in CBT is the emphasis. There's so many nuances. I think some of the beautiful things are, what's the thought that went through your mind? We noted that last episode. What's that thought? Tracking the emotion. And seek, because emotions are a very strong indicator. When it comes to this tracking that emotion, what is the thought at that point? Exploring some of the hot cognitions. What are those that are particularly emotionally associated and intense, that drive the behavior? But there are other parts to it, such as it's so clear, and we can take it for granted, but the importance of in-session work, role-playing, simulating, real-world testing. And what CBT shows undoubtedly is that therapy has progressed beyond any kind of idea or notion about the talking cure. That we explored was a development many, many years ago with Breuer and Freud and the talking therapy. But today, anytime therapy is primarily or exclusively limited to talking, it's insight-based, and insight doesn't necessarily lead to change. So what's so exciting about CBT is the emphasis in session, role-playing, simulating, and bringing about this behavioral experience, the change. And that is what changes beliefs.
I think you describe it so beautifully, and it's in the here and now, it's in session and experiencing it, and then out of session, but still in the here and now.
Yes.
And experiencing it, and that's what change beliefs.
Yes, indeed. In fact, it's such a hallmark of this approach that what is now absolutely clear is that CBT has nothing to do with positive thinking.
No.
It's all around behavioral experience and change. It's not to do with trying to get someone to think more positively. No, that's not it. And even when one identifies that some of those thoughts are not helpful or ineffective, it's certainly the goal is the flexibility around those thoughts. One of the, of course, because it just keeps developing. Once you begin to understand that it's not the situation, but it's the interpretation that we have, then we certainly have interpretations, but we can also have a relationship to that interpretation. And it sounds very abstract, but what a difference. It's like another position. And so suddenly, it's not so much in CBT, is that automatic thought true, but it can move to, well, do I need to obey it? So it begins to introduce a degree of flexibility. How can we cope with certain thoughts that are distressing or uncomfortable with more flexibility? What can we do in this situation that's more effective? And that really starts moving us towards, really today in CBT, acceptance therapy, issues around flexibility, our values, and that's also water development. But because it's so broad and there's so many nuances, every time it still really comes down to identifying that loop, interrupting, and enabling of a new experience, some new learning. Identify the loop, interrupt it, facilitate or create new learning.
New learning.
And that is CBT, and it's so elegant. Because that is such a clear pattern.
Just when you describe it like that, it really makes it so clear, and everything it fits with it. all the experience with CBT previously, it has a different meaning looking at it like that.
Yes.
So I think it's so exciting, and I think we can just spend hours on this of really exploring it further. There's so much richness in this.
Yes.
And of course, in further developments as well,
yes.
as you mentioned.
Yes. Yeah, it would be perhaps at a later point we could really circle back and spend a lot more time. But that at a much later point. The important thing is to see it clearly and to understand it and begin to think about how to utilize it as part of a really deeply meaningful integrative approach.
I'm looking forward to that at some point when we get back to that.
Yes.
Thank you for joining us on The Art of Therapy. If you found this episode meaningful or if it expanded your knowledge, we would love to hear from you in the comments section. We are looking forward to continuing this journey with you. Until our next episode.